For those of you that are new, again, welcome. My name is Joel. I'm the pastor of the church. And this morning we are beginning a new series that is going to be drawing us closer and closer to Easter. I had an experience on Friday night. I was out at No Frills with Kanan and Masika. And we walked into No Frills, and immediately Kanan's eyes got wide, and he said, "Easter chocolate is here!" And I thought, I'm going to be spending a little bit more money than just buying a little bit of fruit and vegetable here, obviously. But he's like, it seems so early. Why is it already out? And he picked up on a reality that I think all of us kind of experience, is we just kind of jump from like Halloween into Christmas, into Valentine's Day, into Easter, and just candy and chocolate just seem to be continually flowing and flowing and flowing more and more. And so we might as well join in and enjoy it, right? I mean, that seems like the logical conclusion to do. But as I started to think about that, I thought, okay, yeah, as we're getting closer to Easter, we are, getting closer and closer. And so what I wanted to do for the next number of weeks is to look at a couple of specific examples in the Bible where there are this variety of encounters that Jesus has with individuals. Because oftentimes, we're familiar with Christianity, we're kind of aware of the big events, the big encounters around Jesus' life. Like we're aware of Christmas and we're aware of Easter, but sometimes what gets missed is all the other interactions and encounters that Jesus had with individuals. Encounters that in many ways had such a profound impact on these people that it dramatically transformed their lives. What I want to do is look at how, in many ways, when these people had these encounters with Jesus, they first of all oftentimes weren't aware that much ahead of time that it was about to take place. In some places, Jesus kind of showed up unannounced and in many ways caught these people a little bit off guard. But through a simple conversation, something began to change in their lives. And so the next number of weeks, we want to look at some of these encounters, some of these exchanges that Jesus had with these individuals. But my hope is this, is that we won't keep these encounters at arm's length. Because sometimes there is a temptation, there is a danger, there is just a comfort level that when we read the Bible or when we talk about Jesus and we hear about some of the incredible stories he has, we like to keep them at arm's length. We like to study them, we like to talk about them, but beginning to apply them to our lives is sometimes the challenge. And so regardless of where you are in life, regardless of where you are in faith, whether you are someone who is a Christian and has been following Jesus for a number of years or for an extended period of time, or whether you're someone who is still just kind of checking Christianity out, what I ask of you is this, is would you be willing just to take it another step? To begin to ask the question of, okay, as I read these stories in the Bible, as I read these encounters that Jesus has, what does this mean for me in my life? Is there some sort of takeaway? Is there some sort of opportunity for me not only to learn from these encounters, but ultimately experience them as well in my life? And so this morning we're going to jump into the very first story. It comes rather early in Jesus' ministry. It can be found in John chapter 4. And so if you have a Bible, if you brought a Bible with you, you can turn there. If you don't have a Bible, there's Bibles in the pews in front of you. If you prefer to look on a device, phone or a tablet, whatever it is you want to swipe there, we're going to go to John chapter 4. But in case you don't want to do any of that, we're going to read it for you anyways. And so Karen's going to come up, read it for you, and then we're going to dive in and understand it a little bit more, and then ask the question, what does this mean for you and for me sitting here in Paris, Ontario in 2018? Let's take a read.
John chapter 4, verses 1 to 18. May God bless this reading from his word. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true."
And so we stop short of the story so that we can kind of take a bit of a step back and begin to unpack it a little bit to understand that this is more than just some common chit-chat that Jesus is having with a woman over a glass of water. I think sometimes one of the challenges is when we come to the story and we come to the examples of Jesus, we may not fully understand everything else that is going on around it. Because from the outside looking in, 2,000 years later, what's the big deal? You know, Jesus is having a conversation with a woman, wanting to get a drink of water. Seems rather simple, seems rather casual. But if you were back in Jesus' day, you would have realized that there was actually something significant going on. This was not just some simple random conversation that Jesus was having with a woman as he was passing by. You see, in Jesus' context, Jews and Samaritans did not get along. And so the very fact that Jesus is in Samaria and chatting to a Samaritan would have started to kind of blow people's minds. You see, many, many years earlier, Israel was one nation. But eventually they were divided, and eventually they were conquered. That a ruling nation came in and took the majority of Jews out of Israel into exile to Babylon. And that those that remained, while they remained, began to marry with another nation, the Canaanites. Which, if you're or you're fairly familiar with the Bible, God spoke against marrying with other nations. And so what happened over time is the Jews that were left behind, they started to marry the Canaanites. And as a result, they started to blend their faith or their religion. They would take elements of the Jewish faith, they'd take elements of the Canaanite faith, and they would start to blend them together. Well, years go by, and this continues to happen. And eventually the Jews who were exiled into Babylon are returned to Israel. And they realize what has gone on. And for the Jews, they can't believe it. They view these Samaritans, this new tribe, as being racially inferior to them because they have married another nation. They also view them as complete heretics because they are no longer following just God. They're following some of the Canaanite gods as well. And so there's this dislike, almost probably more than dislike. There is a hatred. And I know hate is a strong word, right? And I know in our household when our kids, they dislike something, we don't drop the H-bomb, right? You can say I disapprove or I don't dislike, but to drop the hate on it, that's loaded language. But that's precisely the language that should be used to describe the Jews and the Samaritans. And we all know that when you really, really dislike someone and you don't go about repairing it, time just eventually fixes it eventually, right? Yeah, that doesn't work then, it doesn't work now. What happens is when you dislike someone and you have a hatred on for someone, time doesn't heal. It actually makes it worse and worse and worse. And so here we come to a place in history when Jews and Samaritans wanted nothing to do with one another. It would be so bad that they would avoid one another. You see, Jesus was on a journey from Judea to Galilee. And in order to get there, the quickest route would be to go through Samaria. It would cut days off their journey. And so Jesus decides to go right through Samaria. But for the typical Jew, they would go the long route. They would go all the way up. It would be like if you were wanting to get to Ottawa, you would cut all the way up to North Bay and then cut back across the other way. You'd go deliberately out of your way because you don't want to hang out with Kingston people. I get it. Queen's University is there. I went to Bishop's University. We didn't like Queen's people a whole lot, but I wouldn't go all the way up to North Bay just to get to Ottawa to avoid them. Yet that's what Jews would do because they disliked the Samaritans so much. And so that's kind of the first thing to notice. The second thing is Jesus is talking to a woman. Now, this woman didn't know Jesus, and Jesus hadn't met this woman before. So for us, that would be no big deal, right? It's almost kind of impolite not to talk to other people. If you're kind of hanging out in the grocery line and you haven't met this person before and you just strike up a conversation, no one would consider that as being rude. But in Jesus' day, if you were a man, you would never speak to another woman whom you didn't know in public. Because people might start to assume, well, maybe you actually do know this woman. And maybe there's something else going on. And so they would just stay clear of it. You would never talk to a woman in public, especially if you were a respectable Jewish rabbi who many people believed Jesus was. So there's almost two barriers, two boundaries that Jesus stepped over. But then there's a third one that is a little bit more subtle. And this is the one that even the woman doesn't bring up. And it's the fact that this woman has a past. Jesus makes reference to it a little later on in the conversation. But this woman had been with numerous men. And people would have been aware of it. And the fact we know that is because of the time this woman goes to the well. We're told that it's around the 6th hour, which in our talk is lunchtime. And they're living in a culture where the woman would go to the well to get water for the day. And so it would make sense practically to go first thing in the morning so that you'd have enough water for the rest of the day. Also, living in the Middle East, it would make sense not to go in the hottest time of the day to get water because you're just making life more difficult than it needs to be. And so you'd show up at the well early in the morning and you'd be gathering your water. And so there'd be other women there. And so a little bit of time to catch up, to chit-chat and to talk about, what's going on in your little corner and what's going on in my little corner. And I'm sure a little bit of gossip was being talked. And so who do you think these women will often be talking about? The woman who shows up at noon because she wants to avoid all the weird looks, all the kind of hushed whispers under their breath. Because they had someone in their community, in their town, who had a past. And we all know this, right? When you want to not have a conversation about something you're embarrassed about, you avoid it. You avoid going to those places. You avoid seeing those people who you know are going to talk to you about it. And yet Jesus goes to this woman. And it's in this one encounter that we see lived out this incredible reality of perhaps one of the more well-known Bible verses we have. John 3:16, just a chapter earlier, Jesus in another conversation gives this Bible verse that talks about, for God so loved the world. Okay, we got this section with me. Let's try it over here. For God so loved the world. Like not for God so loved the Jews, or for God so loved only these people, or for God so loved the people who morally have figured life out. Right? No, for God so loved the world that he sent his son, Jesus. And this is an amazing story that actually enacts that verse. Because here Jesus is stepping over cultural barriers. He's stepping over religious barriers. He's stepping over moral barriers and gender barriers in order to bring what we're about to see is the good news of the gospel. So often what we see in the encounters of Jesus is that he doesn't wait for people to come to him. He goes to where people are. He meets people where they are at because he has something far greater for them. You know, one of the first takeaways I think about in my life, when I think about the life of the church and Christianity around this world, is are we taking our cues from Jesus? Are we living in a same way where we are going to people, even potentially putting our reputation on the line because we have something so good, and that is faith in Jesus that we want others to have? Or do we take the more common approach of stepping back and waiting for people to come to us, or waiting for people to figure out life, to get their life straight, and then we can come and tell you about God? Why is it in our society that the church is so often more known for what it's against than what we're for? You see, I think some of the challenge is that we confuse agreement and acceptance. And we think that in order to have acceptance, we must have agreement. You must agree with what we believe. We must agree with how you live. We must agree with the choices you make. And then we will accept. Did Jesus agree with this lifestyle, this woman? No. He wanted to give her something far greater, but he accepted her. He engaged conversation with her. And I know in my life, I know in the life of the church, we need to do a better job of stepping into places of people's lives where they are at, and then allow the power of God to bring them to an even greater place. Because Jesus interrupted this woman's life. She hadn't planned on this. She hadn't prepared for this. And Jesus shows up. And before condemning her, before coming down on her, what does he do? He says, hey, can you give me a drink of water? And in the woman's reaction in verse 9, we see right away that this woman is automatically like, whoa, why are you talking to me? You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, I'm a woman. Notice she doesn't talk about her shady past because she doesn't know who she's talking to. She's about to find out. And then Jesus begins to engage her because he took the initiative. He then takes just a common, everyday example and teases it out into something far greater. All of us have been there. All of us have been in a place where you really want a drink of water. You're so thirsty, you're so parched, you might have been exercising, or it's just a hot day, or you're in a place, maybe you've been talking too long on a Sunday morning and you desperately need a drink of water. No one can relate to that. And then you get that drink of water and it's so refreshing. It's like the best thing you've ever tasted. I bet you some of you are really thirsty right now, eh? And you drink the drink of water, you're like, oh, that is so refreshing, that's so refreshing, but it doesn't last. You know that in a few hours or later on in the day, you are need to go back and get another drink and another drink. Well, Jesus is using this as an example to speak to all of life. Essentially beginning to push the question and saying, okay, let's not worry about just physically being refreshed and being satisfied. In all of life, where do you turn for satisfaction? Where do you turn for ultimate meaning? Because we start to see this in the dialogue that Jesus has with the woman. In verse 10, Jesus says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that you ask for a drink, I would give it to you, and it would be living water. Jesus doesn't always come straight out and just say it easily in a way to be understood. And this woman is not really following Jesus at this point. She's like, what? She's like, you mean you can provide water so I don't have to keep coming back to this well? And Jesus is like, no. I'm speaking to something even greater. As he continues and says to her, everyone who drinks this water, everyone who drinks common water, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. It will become in them a spring that wells up into eternal life. Jesus is taking a very common conversation and speaking into an even greater reality. And the reality doesn't matter if you were a Samaritan woman hanging out at a well 2,000 years ago, or if you're someone sitting in a pew in Paris, Ontario. The same question remains, is where do you find satisfaction? Where do you find ultimate meaning in the midst of life? You see, for this woman, she was attempting to find meaning and satisfaction in relationship. And clearly it wasn't working, because she had jumped from man to man to man to man to man, and it wasn't working. And Jesus identifies this in a way, not again to condemn her and to bring her down, but to point to an even greater reality. That ultimate satisfaction is not found in the things of this world, but rather ultimately in a relationship with him. Well, now this woman is intrigued. And being a Samaritan, yes, she has grown up in a culture that has followed other gods, but they've also been aware of the Jewish belief and this understanding of a Messiah, the one that will eventually come and truly reveal God and relationship to God's people. And so she references it. So clearly she's been paying attention. And then Jesus makes a profound statement. And if you follow Jesus, this is incredible, because so often, even his disciples, when he was amongst the Jews, God's chosen people, they were wanting Jesus to reveal himself to them, and he would refuse. Yet on this dusty, hot afternoon, with a Samaritan woman who had a past hanging out at the well, he identifies himself to her. He says, I am the Messiah. I am the one who can bring ultimate meaning into life. And in this one encounter, when she thought she would just be avoiding the crowds and getting water and just continuing upon the life she was trying to put together, her life was changed because of what happens next. She leaves the well. She's so excited, she kind of leaves the bucket behind. And get this, she goes to the town, to the people who had been talking about her, who had been laying gossip about her likely, who she was trying to avoid, and she seeks them out. Do you know when Jesus truly has begun to make an impact in your life? Is when you are no longer so worried about hiding your past and just revealing it, because you know that you have ultimate meaning and forgiveness in Jesus Christ. And so this woman would have gone to the crowds and says, this man I've met, he knows everything about me. He's never met me. He knows everything about me. And he's speaking of this living water. And people must have been just blown away because they hear this woman's testimony and they then go to the well and they actually ask Jesus, can you stay for longer? We want to hear more about this. And as a result of this one encounter, this one transformation, other people see their lives changed and transformed as they too choose to live life with Jesus. This is just such a profound encounter that ultimately can be our experience as well. When we begin to find ultimate satisfaction, not in the things of this world, but in Jesus. Now, I know the place I go when I hear this story, and maybe some of you go, is like, well, you know what? That's kind of like pick low-hanging fruit, right? Clearly this woman needed Jesus or saw her need for Jesus because life wasn't really going so well for her, right? She was jumping from man to man to man, and things just weren't going out. And so she was in need. And oftentimes, we hear those testimonies. We hear those stories of just, life seems to be in the ditch and not going well, and then suddenly there's this profound experience. But if you start to realize it, in Jesus' life, we see these things happening in other people's lives as well. Jump back one chapter into John chapter 3. We're going to go through it real quickly, but you may want to read through it later on. And Jesus meets someone who'd be the exact opposite to this woman and has a very similar conversation. He was a Jewish Pharisee, and so he would have been respected. He was a man. He was a Jew. He had seemingly no moral past. He had figured everything out. Yet something was missing. Because he sought Jesus out in the middle of the night. You see, he had life so well put together that he didn't want other people to see and to recognize that perhaps he didn't have it all together. His name was Nicodemus. And Jesus has a conversation with him as well. The reality that ultimate satisfaction is found in Jesus. And so what we begin to see time and time and time again is just how ultimately Jesus, the conversation he wants to have with all of us, whether we seemingly have life well put together or life is on the rocks, is where you finding ultimate satisfaction and meaning. Because the temptation, the danger is we start to put it in the good things of this world. Sometimes we equate this idea of being separated from God as only the bad things that we do. The poor decisions, the times we give in to temptation, the other things that are going on in our life. But that's not the case. It can also be found in the good things. It can be found in the good things that we attempt to make the ultimate in our life. It can be found in the things of success or of achievement or of power or of wealth or of relationships. And Jesus says, when you make any one of those things greater than me, then you're going to live life always wanting something more. And so my question for all of us is, where do you locate yourself in this story? For some of us, maybe you can relate more to the woman at the well. The life that is barely holding on by a thread. An attempt to find meaning in things, but it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Jesus comes to you where you are at. Christianity is not a clean yourself up first and then you can have a relationship with God. It's recognize your need for him, and he will come in and he will not only forgive you, he will restore you, he will refresh you with a relationship with him. For maybe some of us, we're not like the woman, we're kind of more like Nicodemus. We try to appear that we have it all together. We may have success. We may have great relationships. We may have achievement, but something is still lacking. It's because what we need, far above wealth, accomplishments, success, and power, is life with God. And that life comes through faith in Jesus. That's where transformation begins to take place. That's when we come to a place and are able to recognize that we all have a past. But with Jesus, we can have an incredible future. My greatest takeaway from this story is that Jesus meets you wherever you are, in places in the ditch or in mountains of success. But he won't leave you there. Because no matter how bad you think it is, Jesus can redeem you. And no matter how good you think you've got it, Jesus can give you something greater. And that is a life fully lived, a life filled with satisfaction that is not based upon the things of this world, but is ultimately based upon life with him. And so a simple thought to carry with you this week is, where are you at in the midst of life? And will you allow Jesus to step in, to offer you this living water, a life lived with God that not only sustains us in life, but brings us this incredible promise of eternal life? As Jesus met with this woman, he desires to meet with all of us as well. Let us pray together.